gonna be fun. Machete! Ha! Swung a little wide there.
Hey, Joe. Thanks so much for joining today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
This must be a pretty wild experience, a kind of a different experience for you, this huge, global event.
It is pretty wild. So I'm used to, big events on a global stage, but, not in this medium, and definitely, not something like this, a project like this where, it's very new for me, but at the same time, it still feels somewhat familiar.
Right. So, Sweet Tooth is this iconic character in the gaming world, and I'm just kind of curious how familiar you were with Twisted Metal before getting the part, and what the fan reaction was like when it was announced that you were cast.
Tremendously knowledgeable of the life and saga of Needles Cane through the several games. Like I said, from 1 up to Black, a little bit some of the post-Black games, but. I grew up with Twisted Metal. I think if anybody owned a PlayStation from my age group, it was one of the titles that you got because you could only play so much Warhawk. It's just Twisted Metal was obviously something that was big in my childhood and I grew up with, and given the opportunity to participate in the show, and especially as Sweet Tooth, it was something that I just couldn't pass up.
What I enjoy about your performance is that it's not just, you're menacing and you're beating people up. There's a whole lot of physical comedy going on, even some dancing. What can you say about playing this crazy character and embodying him on set?
It was tremendously fun. It just, Sweet Tooth he's an agent of chaos. He can be absolutely murderous and psychotic 1 minute, and incredibly elegant and graceful the next. So, to kind of shift back and forth through those dichotomies was a lot of fun to do throughout the series. And, it's a fun character to delve into because, nothing's off limits.
And of course, Will Arnett's doing the voice. So on set, what is it like? Are you doing all the dialogue yourself and then, Will kind of dubs it in later?
Yeah, no, on set, I'm doing all the dialogue, obviously the other actors, it helps in their process, and dealing with a real live red-nosed maniac in front of them. So we make it as menacing and crazy as possible. We run at game speed, and then it gives reference to Will, and Will goes into the studio and he does his magic, and we're happy he's doing it.
What was it like for you when you saw the final product?
Super surreal. Obviously seeing dailies and then seeing the finished product and seeing it all kind of laced together, it's for somebody like me it's kind of a first time, it's an incredible experience.
How is the preparation different for when you're preparing for a match, wrestling against preparing here? I'm sure you get your own trailer, all this other stuff. What are the differences and what are the similarities?
So I think in the realm of professional wrestling, you're gearing up for a tremendous physical outburst in a very contained amount of time. Whereas in the acting world, it's a sustained energy. You got to give that energetic performance 20, 30 times over a 5-hour period, and maybe even more. So I think that's just the different approach of it. Whereas, in pro wrestling, we're gearing up to give 1,000,000%, and when it's live on TV and that's your moment. Whereas in film, you got to have some stamina. You got to be able to deliver that performance consistently over and over again in the span of when you're shooting, so that we can get at all the proper angles, get all the right shots. So I think that's the biggest difference between the two mediums as far as performance.
And finally, I've only seen the first 3 episodes, so the second one you pretty much dominate, and it's you and Anthony and Stephanie just having a blast, it seemed like. What was it like working with them and kind of bouncing off of them?
Really, incredibly awesome and easy, and mainly because of their efforts. I mean, whenever you're in a room of actors like Anthony and Stephanie, it's really hard to be like, man, I'm out of my depth in here. But both of them made everything such a wonderful process. They hung in, were there for every take and doing their best to try to make everybody else have their best performance. That I think it translated to what we put together in that episode.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Joe, and congrats on the show. Looking forward to watching the whole thing.
Appreciate it. I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, for your time today. Appreciate it.
Of course.
So this character requires a lot out of you. I mean, there's a lot of physical hijinks, there's a lot of emotional moments, there's comedy, there's drama. I imagine you had the opportunity to basically do it all with this role.
That's exactly right. That's part of why I wanted to do it. It sort of hit everything that I was really interested in challenging myself with, particularly the action stuff. I had just been like itching to do more of that, and to get to do it with one of the world's biggest action stars was a true gift. I got to learn a lot by watching Anthony Mackie work. It was that was really special to me, to be able to watch somebody who, you know, has been on multiple sets doing crazy stunts for a large part of his career, and learning from the best people. You know, I was really like inspired by watching his work ethic around the action stuff, but also like the comedy of the series, the weird, dark gallows humor of this series is just, for me, it's like the stuff that I absolutely love. And so to be able to do all of those things in one series, like you said, it was really exciting.
Speaking of Anthony, I mean, you two obviously have great chemistry. I mean, right off the bat, they're like an old married couple, button heads constantly, and it's just fun to watch that evolve. Talk about just working with him and what the sort of overall atmosphere was like on that set.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony's a great boss. I mean, he executive produced this series along with Michael Jonathan Smith, our showrunner, and Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick, who are behind Zombieland and Deadpool. And I think, you know, he really understood what that character needed, which is like, I mean, Anthony himself really has the gift of gab. He can tell a story like nobody. And he really brought that energy to John Doe. And he also brought a vulnerability and a sort of like determinedness and a joy. It's really fun to see him be so joyful on screen. And I think it's like, you know, it's electric to watch him on screen doing this stuff. I had a great time with him. I honestly think like any actor could probably have chemistry with Anthony, because he's a really giving actor, and he's an extremely, really dedicated. He's really dedicated to his craft. And you can see that from his career.
Yeah, absolutely. He's great. And I've only seen the first 3 episodes, so maybe this is ultimately addressed, but like, did you think a lot about this character's backstory and, you know, what she was like before the world went to hell, and what makes her tick, things like that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've gotten strict instructions that I'm not allowed to give those things away, but the answer is yes. And the answer is all will be revealed, or most things will be revealed. But yeah, that was certainly an element of how the character is built. I had a true nerd at heart. I had, we shot the series out of order. And so we also shot 2 episodes at a time, depending on like how we were doing it. And so in the basement of the house that I was staying at, I had written every scene had a note card. Every episode had a different color. Every act had a column. And so I like mapped out how everything happened for her, and when things happened, and how things were structured, and where she was on her like mental and emotional journey. And then having that map, then I was like, oh, okay, I know where to go now. It's like, I don't have to look at the GPS anymore. I know where to go. That was really helpful, knowing her from the inside that way.
And to that end, is there one episode, or maybe even just one sequence or extended action sequence or something that, you know, stood out to you when you were making it, and you thought, you know, okay, this is definitely going to be something people are going to really dig?
This is a weird answer, but I think like the balance of video game style, for lack of a better word, like video game style fights and comedy, it's a weird place to live, but if you can get it right, it's really fun. Yeah. And like I said, I think Brett and Paul have a history of getting that right. I think Michael Jonathan Smith deeply understands that tone. And I think audiences are really going to enjoy when those two things combine on screen in our show, and they do quite a bit.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for your time, and congrats on the show.
Thank you.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you so much.
Hey, Eric.
It's a pleasure to talk to you, man.
Thank you.
So, your character, at least based on the first few episodes, is sort of the big bad of the show. But
Right.
I have to imagine that he views himself as justified in his actions. And can you talk about his worldview and his sort of overall place in Twisted Metal?
Sure. Yeah, no, he, whenever the grid crashes, and in the year 2000, and he's a young police officer, he's not anywhere close to being trained, experienced. He just doesn't have the wisdom to deal with what society has been hurled into. And then, but by the time we start our story, it's a couple of decades later, and he has become extremely wise and empowered to be, in his mind, the anvil, the hammer and anvil of justice. And he sees himself as the ultimate authority for good and law and justice, and so he doles it out in whatever fashion he thinks is necessary, and isn't particularly discerning about the crimes. You're a criminal, this is how I deal with you. And he obviously, throughout, I don't know how many you've seen, but throughout, he's got some very colorful ways of dealing with criminals, and sometimes it's, the harsh extreme, but at other times it's actually pretty hilarious.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. I really liked that episode where we kind of see his origin story, if you will, and I really like the actor playing the character, younger guy.
Yeah. That guy was a local hire in New Orleans.
Yeah, he was amazing.
Yeah.
He was amazing.
Yeah.
Did knowing that about that character kind of help you in the present day stuff?
I wasn't around when they shot. I'm in that episode, obviously, but I wasn't around when they were shooting that stuff. Clearly, I read the episode and I met the guy that played Youngstone. But really, it was talking with Michael. But it was also just like with anything, although with the writer's strike, you're not getting multiple versions of the same story. But, reading, those episodes and then getting revisions and revisions and revisions of how the story was sharp and the character was sharp and the dialogue, the action, everything. But just really paying close attention to that particular episode because it was Stone's origin story. And then, and that the guy was like a kind, thoughtful, generous person who really believed in law and order and had the integrity of being a police officer. And then everything crashes, and, that's what he has to deal with. Now he's got to deal with the world that's defined by Twisted Metal, and the insanity of trying to pull it back to the center of what he considers law and order.
And how aware were you of the Twisted Metal franchise? And it has this huge fan base, and people have been wanting to see a live action version of it for quite a while.
Right. Not at all. I had heard the title of the game, just because gaming is so omnipresent. But having two teenage daughters, one of them is a sophomore in college, and so she had an awareness of it, but she said something like, yeah, a lot of guys I know really love that game. And then whenever I started doing my research, that, you know, it actually came out in the early 90s, and then there have been all these different versions of it. And then just reading the scripts, then doing as much as I could online. And then the able assistant of Michael Jonathan Smith, who's the showrunner, you know, just talking to Michael, just really talking to Michael. And just, you know, it's like how his imagination, along with all of the other creators, Paul and Reed, Will Arnett, and his producing partner, how they all just sort of brought it to where Sony and Peacock, you know, it was like, okay, yeah, this is translatable for the you know, 2023 society.
Yeah, well, I think people are going to dig it, and thanks so much for your time, and congrats on the show.
Thank you.
Tonight is opening night.